Welcome to the Liberty Insider. This is the program that brings you up-to-date news, views, and discussion and insight into religious liberty events in the US and around the world. My name is Lincoln Steed, editor of Liberty Magazine, and my guest on this program, repeat performance, Greg Hamilton, president of the Northwest Religious Liberty Association. Let's hit something really contemporary. People may not always recognize it, but there's an incredible alliance between what I would call the politically active religious right and this present administration. And they have an agenda, and they found an accomplice in the president and his administration. And a big part of what motivates them is their view that the United States is a Christian nation. Mm-hmm. And of course, you and I can discuss that. Where do they get this from? Is it the Constitution, or is it just their social construct? But they really believe it.
It reminds me of something that occurred to me. Recently, I was at the University of Idaho Law School in Moscow, Idaho, and a group of students filed in, about 50 of them. And in the back row, I noticed there were some students that came in with some placards. Come to find out afterwards, they were from the Atheist Student Society there, and they had placards that had some very irreverent statements like "Christian nation, my blank." And it was interesting because at the end of the lecture, they said, "Wow, we cannot believe
they didn't put their placards up."
They couldn't believe that an evangelical could believe in the separation of church and state, and that a Christian nation by law was absolutely absurd. They could not believe that somebody, an evangelical, could actually believe that.
And they were not imagining that, because our present Attorney General, about the time he was appointed, went public and said he doesn't believe in the separation of church and state.
Oh, yes.
It's an amazing statement. And many of the religious right, I've heard them say that there's no such thing as a separation of church and state, and they say openly, this is a Christian nation. Well, it's wishful thinking in my view, and I think you'll agree, because there's nothing to prove that except their self-divine construct.
Well, absolutely. In fact, the whole idea of a Christian nation is really born out of Puritanism, and it's Puritanism run amok. The constitutional founders ran like crazy away from the Puritan founding model. Yeah. They wanted a system in which no church, no religious authority controlled the government, and likewise that the government stayed out of the church and religious affairs. They wanted both. The government, in other words, must be neutral towards religion and religious expression, meaning religion should thrive as freely as possible, but at the same time, it could not govern the nation. And that's a fine line, but it's an important line to hold.
Well, it's dangerous when you cross it. But what strikes me is the supreme irony. That concept began back when the United States was overwhelmingly a Protestant Christian community or society, right? That's not true anymore.
No.
I don't know the exact figures off the top of my head, but those that openly identify themselves or as practicing Christians are a minority, and there are many other, 30 million Muslims and so on, plus the actions of our society through its popular culture, and that hardly a representative of Christianity.
Well, Pew survey...
I could wish it was so.
Yeah. Pew Charitable Trusts on Religion and Public Life put out a survey, and they found in their studies that youth and young adults from the ages of 15 clear up to 40 are very supportive of the constitutional separation of church-state, which, by the way, has made a huge comeback in public life, and because in the 70s and 80s, even the early 90s, as many as 70% were very much against the separation of church-state. All of a sudden, it swung completely back, where most of society, a vast majority, believes very firmly in the constitutional separation of church-state, and is very much against this mingling of church and state when it comes to making the Christian or making our nation Christian through Christian morals by law. They're very much against that.
And there's a certain irony. It's your interpretation, but the mostly Protestant religious right are opposed to the separation of church and state.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But the Roman Catholic Church is very vocal and adamant in its support of the separation of church and state.
Well,
So what's going on here?
well, and why do they say that? I mean,
Well, that's what I want you to tell me. I have some theories.
well, they're for that because they want to make sure, because the Roman system has their own ecclesiastical law, so to speak. They have their own internal system that is very attached to the Vatican, the Holy See, the Church itself mainly, in terms of the way it governs itself. And so they don't want any inclusion of that. In fact, they view the Church as really sovereign even over the state. But at the same time...
The doctrine of subsidiarity
Yes.
States that.
Yes, but at the same time, they want to make sure in today's civil society, especially in the United States of America, that it remains separate because they feel that they are more free to do what they need to do.
Right. Yeah, good outline. But it's an interesting dynamic.
It makes them more autonomous.
It's the world is turned on its head. Originally, we've explained in other programs part of the discussions that led to the First Amendment and the separation. But originally, that was used in a cudgel-like fashion against the Roman Catholic Church because it was designed to exclude popery from
But the
this
problem is the Roman Catholic Church, in terms of its leadership, including the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, they believe in only a one-directional wall. In fact, their views are very similar to the Christian right in the sense that they believe that the state or the government should keep its hands off the church and their affairs, but at the same time that the church has a right to essentially inspire and direct the affairs of state.
Sure, when push comes to shove.
Yes.
And it's partly human nature, and human nature projected through church organizations. They want some control.
I think one of the things we see as our country becomes more secular, we're seeing more of a desperation, if you will, a Hail Mary, if you will, on the part of the Christian right and even Catholic conservatives to basically fight back against what they believe is secularism run amok, such as same-sex marriage, for example. And they want desperately to restructure America. In other words, they see this as their last chance, really, to, even though they're a minority, they view themselves as representing the majority will of the country, even though they're really, in reality, a minority. They want to seize the opportunity to take these issues for what they are and rally their base and to cry out against same-sex marriage and other things that they don't like abortion, to somehow take this opportunity to seize the country back.
Well, I think you and I agree from a purely Christian point of morality. Abortion is very suspect. It's opposing the life giver, and the whole gay lifestyle is certainly condemned as a position and as a moral position. It's clearly condemned in the Bible. The argument is whether we will use and try to get the power of the state to enforce religious dictates.
But you know how they do that? That's very simple. A lot of people don't understand this political science dynamic. You see, in a democratic system and democratic republic that we have, what you see is happening. If you get enough, the idea of the Christian right is if you get enough representatives in office to put forward your views, you can still be the minority in the country.
Right.
And the vast majority will have to follow the dictates of those so-called representatives
But
in
on
government.
certain things, and this was what the founders and framers were concerned about, on certain things, even if it's the majority, you still shouldn't push them through.
But they're counting on the majority to be apathetic.
Yes.
And that's what they're hoping
And
for.
the majority are apathetic. I think one of the weaknesses, but I know the reason for it, is that so few of the voters do actually vote in the United States. So at the best of times, you've got a minority that are setting public policy.
Most people don't realize that when it comes to voting rolls, Democrats outnumber Republicans, conservative Republicans, by almost 3-to-1 in terms of voting rolls. That if Democrats actually got all their voters out, Republicans would never win an election. That's a fact.
Well, that might not be good. So.
No, exactly, but they don't. And so
I mean,
what happens
is a partisan issue, but it's
one of the things that keeps voters from getting out to vote is I don't know if you've studied propaganda tactics by both the right and the left, but clearly the effort to suppress voter mood, in other words, to increase as much apathy as possible, actually causes Democrats to lose a lot of elections. In other words, if you can suppress the vote, you have a chance of winning.
Right.
And also bad weather causes the Christian right to get their people into office. And that's also been proven by a number of
I mean, these are
studies.
factors that are at play in any election in any country,
Yes.
but they're used here as in other places.
Right.
It's not just
They're tactics that are
people
used.
purely voting for what they want. There are people that influence it one way or another.
Now, don't misunderstand me, because I have real problems with the Democratic Party in many respects. Okay, my problem is that I always go for those who champion the constitutional separation of church and state.
Well, let's keep it on that issue. Yes.
Yes.
And we should be the friend of any faction, party, or whatever that's promoting
Yes.
the Constitution and religious freedom. But we can't afford to be partisan in supporting, which
Right.
the religious right have encouraged this, that because, say, conservatives were against abortion, therefore you're with them regardless of what they do. I mean, that's nonsensical, but that's how it's devolving.
And you may be an independent, but I'm a registered Republican, and
Well, you don't need to tell it on this.
I know, but I'm going to. But I'm a moderate Republican, and I say that because I believe that sometimes our country has lost its way in terms of really understanding its values, in terms of understanding what the Constitution represents. It represents a democratic Republican system, a representative system in which there is a check and balance both on church and state, but also on the people themselves. We've discussed this in past programs. We the people was meant to champion the majority will of the people, but yet the Bill of Rights were put there to do what? To protect minorities against the abuse of the majority.
Right.
And even Supreme Court justices have made it very clear that, however, sometimes even the will of the minority can abuse the will of the majority in a unjust way. And so they have to constantly check and balance those things. So when we're talking about a Christian nation here, we have to look at it in terms of what is best for the nation. Is it best for our nation to follow down a fundamentalist road that determines that certain actions and certain lifestyles are not allowable? If it endangers the good of the whole country, then yes, it does. And that's the big debate. Does same-sex marriage endanger the future of this country? And some would argue yes, and many argue no.
Well, it's certainly a huge social experiment, and I've written about that before. It's a massive social experiment with implications for economic, public health. I mean, on every area that society functions, it has the potential to spin it out of control in ways that nobody could imagine. Maybe good direction, but just as equally very bad. I mean, good societally. There's no moral good from it that I can see. But so we're at a crossroads. But I believe one of the reasons that this Christian nation thing is rising up like, I was going to mix a metaphor and say like an albatross, but it's rising up like the monolith in 2001 Space Odyssey, is that the U.S. has never really had what other old world countries have, a unifying point for patriotism, because usually it's ethnic, often religious, often a huge, like Israel.
And we're a melting pot.
Yes, right.
We're a melting pot. Yeah.
So basically in the U.S. mythology has substituted for those old world things. And one of the mythologies is a Christian nation idea, that we're like Israel coming out of Egypt, where it's just to the point of ridiculousness, apart from the Constitution denying it, is that it's now a far more polyglot population, and that's just inaccurate to describe the people and the way they function.
Yeah.
We'll take a break and come back to finish our discussion. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the Liberty Insider. Before the break, we were really heavy into discussing this Christian nation concept that really drives so much of the religious liberty discussion in the U.S. of late.
Well, I think of Sandra Day O'Connor, former Supreme Court Justice. She wrote, "The religious zealot and the theocrat frighten us in part because we understand only too well their basic impulse. No less frightening is a totalitarian atheist who aspires to a society in which the exercise of religion has no place." So there are the Christian nationists on one hand, and yet there's the secular humanists that really are at war with against freedom of religion. I think of Ronald Reagan Jr., his commercial on TV that you see, the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Yes.
And a lot of people would argue, yeah, we must be free from religion, but how far do you take that? You know, you're not going to get very far. I mean, you may get some followers to support that, but to deny that we don't have Christian roots and we don't have a Christian foundation and a Christian society culturally is really leading our nation down a bad road.
I used to listen a lot to the late Christopher Hitchens' debates because he was a radical atheist. And he had a lot of history on his side. And of course, those that attacked him would often bring up Stalin or some other secular, or Hitler even, although I think it's wrong with Hitler. Hitler had allied himself very close to the state church and even to Roman Catholicism. But my take on history is that atheism is a mortal enemy of faith. But its weapons are mockery, ignoring and just marginalizing religion. Right-wing religionists, as Sandra Day O'Connor is referring to, they will cut off your head and string you up and crucify you all in the name of justice and righteousness. I think it's an easy point, especially in the US, where some of our worst excesses, the Ku Klux Klan, it was anti-Catholicism, white Christian America, and we don't want to go back to those days.
Well, I had a professor at Portland State University years ago in Oregon that was a former Mormon bishop who had turned atheist, okay? And he was my philosophy professor. I took 3 courses from him, a brilliant guy, brilliant individual, but he made an argument that I fought against and I still don't believe is accurate or true. You see, they're motivated by something that we don't realize. They believe that a society free of religion will be even more moral than a society with religion. Mm-hmm. So they believe in moralism, they believe in morality, they say they do, okay? And that our society would be even more moral. You don't dare use the word righteous with them because they don't like that.
Well, it's the morality of the preservation of the species. Yes,
exactly. But so that's their argument, and a lot of people don't understand that side of the argument. I went to the Elko Athletic Club when I was a pastor in Elko, Nevada, way out in the middle of northeastern Nevada desert. And there was a guy who was worth millions, and then he squandered it by gambling in the United States. He came from Ireland and ended up losing everything, ended up being taken by this woman who owned this business in Elko called the Elko Athletic Club. And so you could order from the bar there after working out. You could order smoothies or whatever, and then some people, got alcohol and everything. I always got a smoothie. But he and I used to have, he was a big old tall guy with a handlebar mustache and everything, bald and everything, and funny looking guy, dark eyebrows and a really funny smile. Nicest guy though. Anyway, we would argue.
Oh, I thought you were describing it.
For 3.5 years, we would argue almost daily at the gym about, what would a society look like free of religion, absent of religion? And I said, you can't. I said it would die. This would be the ugliest place on the earth. I said, Christianity is like the salt of the earth, like the Bible says, like Christ said. Without it, you would have no goodness in society. And so, see, the atheists argue that you would have even more goodness without religion. That's their argument.
Well, I think the answer lies in the middle a bit. There's a natural morality that naturally most tribes and societies prohibit killing, and they regulate interactions on a certain level that often are uncannily similar to Christianity or to Judaistic Christian type religions or even Islam. But that's not the real question. We're talking about what dynamic is driving first to be the Christian nation, and what is the real threat? And like, I'll throw in a wild card that I've never heard anyone write about, but I think it's true. The most negative things you can say about secularism, right? You explain how they believe religion is their mortal enemy because better off without it. But we're faced with a hybrid now. We have religious entities, like the Church of England has had several archbishops of Canterbury that don't believe in the virgin birth, don't believe in miracles, don't believe in divine agencies.
Right.
They are functioning as radical secularism.
Yep.
In their advancement of their religious organization. So it isn't as simple as radical secularists coming at you or wild-eyed puritanical
well, and that's an interesting
fanatics.
dynamic in Europe alone, because what you have is you have the Eastern European countries that are pressing against the Western European countries. Western Europeanism seems to be taking the increased secular road, and Eastern European countries are more and more taking a more fundamentalist road, including Poland just passed recently in their parliament a nationwide Sunday law. And so
family rest day.
Yeah, family rest day. And so I find that interesting, but it seems that they're converging. Who wins? I still think, even in this country, the United States of America, that fundamentalism run amok wins. Why?
Yes.
Because I believe that secularism is inherently apathetic.
That's what I was saying earlier.
And
they're not likely to come at you with all the fangs showing.
Right. And so because of their apathy, they just want peace, live and let live. You could obviously, the counterexample to that, the contradiction, is the French Revolution, where you had secularists that basically overthrew the religious and political monarchy.
They had a particular reason for the hatred of religion at that time.
But I think the French Revolution is an aberration. I don't think it's really some people say, well, how do you defy what's said in The Great Controversy by Ellen G. White? I don't think the French Revolution is the model to look at when we're looking to the future, because I really believe, and who knows the future, I don't. But what I'm saying is I believe that we're looking at an increased move towards fundamentalism. And what I mean by that is simply this. You see a president who basically garners 37% of the population's approval and won the Electoral College vote, but lost by, nearly 3 million votes, okay? Now, you say, well, how could that be? But if you look at that dynamic...
Well, it's all constitutional.
It's all constitutional.
But we describe it's an aberrant
But in a democratic system, you can have a vast majority that's apathetic and allow a very strong, virulent, aggressive minority to rule.
That's always been a phenomenon.
And I think you're seeing that in Congress. I think we're beginning to see the effects of that in the Supreme Court. Before long, we're going to have right-wing fundamentalist conservatives in a religious bent that fill the seats in the court, that take the place of far left-wing secularist
which we have a problem with in the judiciary right now.
Liberal judges. And so you have this ongoing fight in our governmental system. And it should be clear to anybody watching it that that's what's happening.
Yeah. No, there's a battle for the soul of the United States.
Yes.
I think, and you and I are agreed, I think in my lifetime at least, plus what I've read in the US history, I think this is one of the most troubling and dangerous episodes in the story of the American Republic. And Ellen White, that you referred to earlier, writing, I think, prophetically to Seventh-day Adventists and to a larger audience sometimes, she said that the US one day will repudiate every principle of the Constitution.
Yes.
Now, she also said, alluding to Revelation 13, that two principles are republicanism, in other words, power of the people, and Protestantism. Well, both under threat.
I agree, and I think religious fundamentalism will eventually take over this country in very detrimental ways to our constitutional system and specifically religious freedom. And it's only a matter of time. And again, I don't know the future, neither do you, but we've been given some earmarks both in Revelation and in the book Great Controversy and other sources from current history and current events to basically tell us that, hey, we seem to be heading down this road. Will it stay on that road? Who knows? Some people have always thought that secularism and atheism would take over this country to bring about last day events, but I think it's the other way altogether.
It's one of the great mysteries of history, at least to me, how in the establishing of the United States and the adopting and development of a new constitution, so many of the principles could be barely religious. Deists is probably the best you can give to them. How many irreligious or unreligious or thoroughly secular people could come up with a document that at its heart defends freedom of religion, not just as a line item, but as a concept. I think that's the divine element in the history of the United States, how God could guide people hardly knowing what they were doing. But out of it came a protection that exists to this day of the ultimate right that we should all have to recognize God, to worship Him, to follow Him, to proclaim Him in the way that our conscience dictates. For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.